Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where in my own language, it's all about discovering and cross-pollinating what I think are the building blocks towards a planetary civilization ahead. The headline of today's episode is Gamifying Planetary Transformation. So let me unpack a little bit before I intro my distinguished guest of today. So I want to start with a quote that I found preparing for the podcast. And I think it's really crucial for you as a listener to dive into the matter that we have ahead of us in this, like maybe an hour and a half of the podcast. And the quote goes as following. It says, "A finite game is played for the purpose of winning, an infinite game for the purpose of continuing the play." And secondly, it says, "Strength is paradoxical. I am not strong because I can force others to do what I wish as a result of my play with them, but because I can allow them to do what they wish in the course of my play with them." So I think that already sets the stage and the tone of today's conversation. And then maybe before I intro my guest for today, why do I think in Reckon I agree with my guest that I will introduce in a moment, that playing and gamifying the great transition we're all in is core to the emergent new paradigm. Firstly, because I really think that play is kind of a different attitude than the usual just hustle and grind mentality, so imprinted, in our embodied beings, including myself, through late modernity, or as I often coin it, AK neoliberalism gone haywire. And secondly, I'm curious to unpack that from an ontological standpoint. When they say in the Bible, thou shalt be like children, this for me at least doesn't mean like us, impact entrepreneurs, we shall regress and throw a tantrum because of the great challenges ahead. But we need to include a healthy, rational assessment, including a certain scientific paradigm, and to transcend that in order that we can really embark on a infinite play together. So for me, the infinite play, when people ask me, Alistair, how the heck have you entered, to be the human being that you are? And then I said, well, we have 10,000 grand challenges out there. Pick one you feel like most prone to identify with. Could be environmental problems, could be human rights issues, could be the nature of money. It doesn't really matter, right? And make this a playful interaction with your own purpose. So I'm doing this for the first time, but I know you have a rich and dense and also complex biography. So today, my guest in the podcast is Adam Apollo. And amongst other things, I'm just reading this from my show notes. Adam has been featured as a speaker at the White House, in summit at the United Nations, and at conferences globally. He's the co-founder of unify.org movement, which reaches over 100 million people monthly. And he's also a pretty tech nerdy, geeky CEO of Superluminal Systems. Well, this is more of an intro that I usually give, but to sketch a 3D picture, I often call it like a soul picture, when the people, mainly they listen into it, some of it also watch it on YouTube. It's like, who is that person, Adam Apollo? What are pivotal moments that made you who you are? Not 10 of them, but maybe 2 or 3. Usually it's like a childhood and adolescent, experience that really, shapes this character that you are. So the floor is yours, and curious, to start with, who the fuck is Adam Apollo?
Thank you so much, Alistair. Such an honor and pleasure to be here with you today. Since I was a very young child, I have embarked on certain questionings. I could call them questionings because when I pull a thread, I keep pulling it until I unravel the sweater or until I get to the root of whatever it is. And this was both something that was an excitement for some of my teachers and a total annoyance for others, because I'd often take them down a line of thinking they hadn't considered before and leave them not really knowing the answer and coming to these big questions that nobody has the answer to. In high school, I had a good friend, and we would meet up after school, go play hacky sack, drink some coffee, and talk about how is it possible that you could feel it when someone's looking at you from across the room. There has to be physical mechanics to that. There's no reason that someone should have a tingle on their neck or have their ears burn when someone's talking about them in the current physics paradigm that we all grew up with and that we're taught about in school. And I became immensely curious about questions like this. And it essentially led me to certain discoveries. The discovery that there's a field of vibratory charge in and around my body that's actually capable of being directed and commanded by my consciousness and my intention. Now, of course, when I was a 15-year-old kid, I thought I discovered the force, and I was like, oh my God, the force is real. But of course, I came to realize after a lot of research and a lot of exploration on the internet, and this was the very early days, 1996, I was 15, just to give you a sense of my age and the time period that we're in. I found myself winding my way down rabbit holes online and realizing that there are people around the world that have called this chi or ki or prana or vital force or odic force or magic, you name it, in all of these different cultures and traditions around the world. And I began a hunt for myself, Alistair, to find out why this particular idea wasn't in any of the science that I was taught. And I started reading the best leading edge physics books: Lee Smolin, Three Roads to Quantum Gravity, Brian Greene, The Elegant Universe, learning about special and general relativity, learning about supersymmetry, Gordon Kane, studying the works of the greatest thinkers in physics of our time. And what I found is all of them seem to be pointing towards this hole in physics that was actually filled originally by this idea of the luminiferous ether. And I bring this up because it's such a foundational idea and such a foundational part of our experience. And for me, the phenomenology couldn't be ignored. I couldn't just move past it. And this is the way I began to address thinking in general in my life, as I became a speaker on the future of education, on the future of human life on Earth. How could we ignore the fact that we're clearly in a curve that's going to lead us to the stars? And how could we bypass the reality that we are massively impacting our planet environmentally, as well as, through the massive engines of our corporate empires? And how can we take account for these things? Come back to the reality, to the honesty about our direct and real experience in the world, and begin to apply our thinking to how we can become stewards of change and how we can insert new ideas to allow us to find the path to a sustainable and thriving planetary civilization.
I don't think if I have much to add. I think some of my earliest books have been from Mr. Sheldrake, about like the morphogenetic fields. And then my avenue has mainly been a very structural approach through like reading Ken Wilber, including the footnotes. So let's not dive too much into like academic backgrounds, but let's say one building block is basically to understand the blatantly obvious. If you meditate like myself for 25 years, or if you have done ayahuasca or stuff like that, that everything is connected from all points in the universe through all times and space. I mean, it's just blatantly obvious. It's actually so obvious that once you have found it, you usually laugh about it. But but for me, it was also in would say in my later teens up until my maybe late 20s or so, like an ongoing quest. I wanted to dig as deep up until I had it, which is also from the apocryphic scriptures, always the thing, those who seek shall seek until they have found. And once they're found, they know for sure. So I think in that we agree. So let's say quantum physics aside, when you sketch the people, and maybe you can come back to one or two other, like I always call them like pivotal moments in your biography, besides quantum mechanics, the quantum field, what are the two or three other ingredients, that build the overarching ontological framework for what you're trying to manifest physically on this planet?
Yeah, thank you. Well, honestly, there's such a vast array of those experiences for me. Um, you know, I've always been a deeply scientific thinker, and the way that I approach things is if I've experienced the phenomena and somebody else experiences the phenomena, then I have two data points, right? Which is a lot better than one. And if somebody additionally has experienced that phenomena, wow, now I have three. Now I have something to kind of build a frame of reference around. And one of the pathways for me that's very unusual, that's I think probably few of your speakers might say or talk about, is that I began having simultaneous recall experiences, flashbacks of past lives with other people when I was, some when I was in high school, but mostly when I got into college. And having these kinds of experiences led me to start looking at the longer now, the longer journey of us as souls. Who am I really? Why am I really here? What am I really here for? And I began to essentially go down this pathway where I started to see my sense of purpose really getting brighter and clearer for me. And I started to see that it's not just that I'm interested in unifying science and spirituality, for example, but that my life and my work and who I am has been working on that and teaching that and developing that, not just, in these 40 odd years that I've been alive, but in the many, many years I existed prior to that in other times and other spaces. And I think that my journey through accessing these different times and recovering memories and really healing lots of karmas. I mean, I had my own journeys with ayahuasca and, eventually through peyote ceremonies and different things with a lot of indigenous elders. I essentially got invited to cook for a group of indigenous elders up in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And by a guy who knew my grandparents that ran into me at the grocery store. And I find myself holding space as the only young white kid in a group of about 150 indigenous elders from around the world. And I told them that I was there to represent the youth of the peoples that were not represented in the room. And they demanded that I was in every fire ceremony and every prayer and every sweat lodge. So much for helping my friend cook for them, because at that point I was in. And, I ended up being invited by Orville Looking Horse, who runs Lakota Foundation and is the chief of the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota Sioux Nation and carrier of the White Buffalo Peace Pipe passed down from Crazy Horse, to organize these prayer runs for world peace with his daughter Gracie, because his son had been in a car accident. And I end up running across the country carrying an eagle staff and being made fun of by all the indigenous kids, who have a very kind of, ghetto mentality, you could say, from the way the reservation sort of forges them as, hard little intense kids. And it was really fascinating because I had more Lakota tradition and heart and knowledge and care and curiosity about all the Lakota wisdom and ancient traditions than any of the kids around me that actually were Lakota. But it also drove me to find more of my own tradition and who I am. And I began to really explore different lineage traditions around the world, get to know myself, get to know the Irish lineage, which most people think goes back to St. Patrick, but it's like that's the destruction of the Irish lineage. I mean, the real Irish lineage is ancient and magical and Tuatha De Danann, and has to do with the Celtic culture and the four sacred treasures from the three islands in the sky: sword and chalice, staff and stone. So, doing the indigenous work and wisdom work to get grounded, to get in my body, to heal, to face my karmas, to face my challenges and my mental blocks, and harness who I am, is another really huge part of my life. And it's that, every one of these paths of realization and interconnection have formed a platform for me to know myself better and to integrate more completely and holistically who I am, without fear of being judged for who I am, without holding myself back because I'm worried that somebody else hasn't had the experience I've had. I will tell the story anyway. I will show up anyway. And I've really needed that strength to start to build the kinds of systems and programs that I've built over the years, and be able to deliver them out to the people.
Yeah, let me try to paraphrase what I got. When I see the building blocks necessary for a planetary civilization. With planetary, I basically mean, like, yes, intergalactic species. We will end the podcast with that, but only if we treat the mother organism in a way that I think we should treat our own bodies.
Right.
And
Right.
I think some of the ingredients that I heard, I just want to, like, almost hashtag them and circle back into the room, is like indigenous wisdom beyond tokenizing the other indigenous wisdom as superior. Because the usual thing would be,
Right.
I come also from a northern Germanic background, and I was drawn like into Buddhism and into Hinduism. But actually, I had a very, very deep, actually, one of my deepest mystical recognitions in my whole lifetime through Christian contemplation, because my father put me in front of a fully realized Buddhist monk that was at the same time a Benedictine monk. So kind of these things seem to be in the field when I look throughout the people that I closer vibe with. So let's say indigenous wisdom. The other thing, though in a different terminology, was, like you said, long time. I always say deep time. I know one of the most profound, really healing experiences on a profoundly karmic level was that ultimately what I'm interested in takes many generations. This is far beyond the short speck of time that this physical vehicle called Alistair within I make all these experiences will stay on this planet, right? And just to be humble to that, and nevertheless be servant to and cognizant of the fact that this, like, massive transition that we all, sorry, I have to cut that out. What we have to cut out is the percentage in between habitants and helicopters in Guatemala is the highest. The proportion is the highest on the whole planet. It got more helicopters per human beings than, for example, Brazil or something like that.
Got
So
it. I
anyhow,
couldn't hear anything, by the way, just so you
okay.
know. It
Nevertheless,
totally
let's
blocked it
let's
out.
let's 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 cut that out. So
Okay.
let's come back to deep time, or as you mentioned it, like long time. I really think recognizing us as these embodied physical human beings with all sorts of different, tendencies, some of them more aligned to our dharma, others less, just to recognize we're sitting in a lineage of thousands of generations, and the big transition that we're all in, I don't think it will magically manifest just in like the next 10 years or so. I really think it's an intergenerational endeavor. Before I really want to dive into, like, the platforms and your work and Unify, Superluminal and CoreNexus and stuff like that, is there any other building block in your own operating system that you think makes sense to reference to those listening in before we dive into why platforms, by using the power of platforms? What have you done so far, and where are you standing?
Yeah, I mean, there is one more relevant piece that I could bring to the table. Again, you're kind of digging for the deeply transformative, completely perspective shaping moments in my life. And I really appreciate that and honor that. One of the other major moments that I'm fairly well known for at this point, because I was eventually became interviewed for it by a gentleman named Ruben Langdon, who did a 2-episode series about me on Gaia around it. And this particular experience was me being sober out in the middle of the desert, having gone through some significant healing experiences. And I ended up meeting and having contact with an extraterrestrial being from another world. And it wasn't a vision. It wasn't, wow, like, oh my gosh, I can see multidimensional beings or something like that. She was physical, and she was in the physical on the desert. I was not the only person that saw this being. And my experience with her really opened up a door and changed me in drastic ways, because I'd always known we're not alone. Like, I could always feel it. I did the Drake equation many times, ran lots of scenarios with lots of, estimations of life's resilience, for example, and capacity for DNA to exist on a planet. And I did that in the 90s, when we thought that there was like, 0.0001% Earth-like planets around stars in our galaxy. Now we believe that 99.9% of stars have planets, and 90% of those have the high likelihood of having Earth-like planets. So, I always had this sense, it made sense from the scientific standpoint, but I can tell you that meeting a being from another world and the power of this being's ability to sort of universally communicate was absolutely astounding. It was breathtaking. It changed my life. And when I say universally communicate, I mean they use the power of telepathy. They had some way mechanism of connecting to and entangling to my own brain and mind and perceptual organs, such that they projected ideas, thoughts in a visual, audible, experiential form that was kind of like being dropped into a VR headset. And showed me from this experience and the kind of cascade of things that followed for me after this, I became unshakably aware that we're not alone, and that it is absolutely our destiny as a species to become part of a much larger family of beings and people out there in the galaxy. And that this transition for us is not just about, wow, let's go to the stars and get out of here, or the Musk, like, we're going to Mars, we'll all just like build some wealthy, strongholds over there and everything, and we'll survive in case the Earth is taken out. No, it's actually about planetary stewardship. It's actually about taking total and complete responsibility for our planet, and realizing that our nation state borders are just lines drawn on a map, for example, and realizing that we are a unified life force here on this earth. The plants, the animals, everything is an ecosystem. And we are absolutely embedded in that ecosystem. We are so much a part of it. There's no way we can extract ourselves from it. It is what it means to be alive on a planet together. And that way of thinking and the nature of looking at the possibilities of what we can create technologically, how we can change our perspective and our perception and our way of thinking about ourselves and our lives, that there is a road to that that's so natural and sort of symbiotic to the cultural narrative we're already in, which has superheroes and Star Trek and, all of these visionary media and communication. And some people say, oh, we're all just going to crash. We're going to go back to the Stone Age, and that's how we're going to make the world work because we don't matter. But the reality is that we do matter, and we're part of this planetary evolution. And everything that we've done so far to get to this stage, I believe, has happened for a reason. And it's positioned us in a place where we now have these huge opportunities to take a great leap into becoming a species in stewardship of their planet, releasing our racism and judgment of each other and all of these stupid holy wars and ridiculous old pains, because we're faced with the context that we're not alone, that there are many other species out there. And guess what? They figured out ways to be in total peace and harmony across hundreds of light years, thousands of light years of worlds. And we can learn from that. We can grow up and we can become better planetary stewards with that knowledge.
I love that. So this has not been a part of a podcast, but one of my closest friends, oldest, like innermost onion layer of my friends, I think directly after the conversation, I hook him up with you. He organizes like really like events with in between the US and Europe about like all these data, that now got, uncensored and published. So before we dive into the projects, because I don't know if I have voiced that in the podcast, and also Joy voicing that, for me, since earliest childhood, it has really been abundantly clear that we're not alone. I have not yet had like one of these super clear physical meeting an extraterrestrial being, although I could share some like weird stories, but I can keep that for another podcast, specifically just on ET. What I like about the perspective that I really can only underline is if life exists on a spectrum and we as Homo sapiens, not so sapiens actually, the way we behave, I think we're like not even early adolescents. We're like in between like primary school to early adolescence, how we behave as a species. And this both the recognition that we're not alone as well as deep time should give us a perspective where not only in 100 years from now we as a human species could evolve into, but in 1,000, in 100,000, in 100 million years. That's because as a child we always had this funny game with my father. We're three children, and we were always playing the game, how much into the future do you dare to board a time capsule, to then get teleported, into the future. And I was always thinking as a child, how would humanity feel like in 1,000,000 years or in 100 million years? And I found that like tremendously interesting. So
yeah, beautiful. Wow.
So to give everybody that has not lost, that we have not yet lost the podcast, Adam is not only, much like myself, an odd creature. He has a proven track record. He builds like big things. He has already managed to like manifest massive amounts of things. So what do you think is a good segue into, let's say, the stuff you're building? Shall we start with Unify, with Superluminal? Because I mean, they're kind of entangled, but maybe I don't know if a biographical approach makes sense, or you backcast from where you're standing. I don't really mind, but just that the people now, get the grip of what you're building. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, well, all these things fed directly into these kinds of projects, and Unify came first, so biographically makes sense. I was working with a variety of different people. I'd been traveling around the country, sort of finding people that I felt like were leaders and stakeholders, producers of events, entrepreneurs making companies, building my own network of the people that I saw as having a powerful stake in what the future could look like for this planet. And I end up at this gathering that a friend of mine in San Diego puts together, and he calls a Jedi Council, right? So I go to this Jedi Council in Ojai, and I meet Adil Kassam there. And Adil had been working with Elevate Films. And I also meet Alexander Fairman. And Alex and I are essentially the sort of operational thinkers in the group. So we end up making a whole plan of how to steward this council and run it and guide the conversation and get some production out of it, And it was a beautiful, beautiful time, a beautiful session. There was a lot of really amazing people there. And as I got to know Adil, he was sharing with me a lot of his visions of having a new kind of live aid like concerts, like big events around the world, focused on change, focused on the future, and essentially raising money and driving that money to do good work in the world and good impact in the world. And I, at the time, was doing a somewhat kind of esoteric project, which was experimental just to play with, which was something I called global telepathic conjunctions. So, what happens when you have enough people of the same mindset dropping in meditation about the same thing at the same time, focusing on making a change? And I'd done some projects for World Water Day and for greening companies. I did a big project in New York City at one point with a few friends where we were doing essentially massive magic to shift consciousness and perception towards understanding the need for environmental projects and work that's in more stewardship towards the world. And so Adil and I ended up coming together, and eventually he reached out to me in San Anselmo at one point. He's like, bro, I got this domain, unify.org. What do you think? And I'm like, dude, it's perfect. Like, let's do it. He's like, yes, like we're going to do it. And we're going to do it for the end of the Mayan calendar. I'm like, yes, December 21st, 2012. It's on. Let's get the whole planet lit. We were just having a blast with it. And, we really saw the potential of, as Teilhard de Chardin says, of kind of lighting up the noosphere, of turning on the collective consciousness of the planet a little bit more, and hopefully, upgrading people. And in those days, I thought, yeah, probably possible that people could just pop open. And I think that does happen. It's just not going to necessarily happen for everybody at once. It's like we can kind of target and open up certain sectors of people and demographics. But we ended up getting together this guy, Patrick.
Wait, this never happened in
Yeah.
1.5 years of recording. So I just need to make a note here in the
Okay.
notes. And we again start with unify needs to
Yeah, I think I caught right before it dropped out. I was starting to say, um,
let's
and he
let's
knew
really
this
just
guy,
start.
Patrick Confley. So
Exactly. Let's really just start again with Unify. I just need my show notes and you organized in a handy way again. Um, that's fine. So that will be cut out. Um, so after unpacking all the concepts and the pivotal moments in your biography, to ground the conversation in the concrete projects, that you have like physically materialized. Um, let's start with Unify, because if I get it right, that was the first of the many, let's say, entangled, stacked into each other projects that you got off the ground. So I'm really just curious on the genesis, like the birthing moment of Unify, and then really what you have done so far with Unify and where you see it still playing a very core role in like unifying these projects together in this like iOS, as I would call it.
yeah, sure. Yeah, well, back in 2012, I came together with Adil Kassam and his friend Patrick Cronfley. And Adil had had these visions of crafting a new kind of live aid concert, something that could bring together people in massive events around the world to drive money and change and impact. And I've been doing these events I like to call global telepathic conjunctions. What happens when a group of people meditate together, focus on the same idea, and essentially seek to make change collectively? Patrick was working on these things called med mobs, meditation mobs in city hall buildings, literally. And we have all these photos of med mob in different city halls, which would really helped us kind of launch Unify, because Patrick also had tons of organizational connections. So between the three of us, I doing tech, Adil fundraising and trying to bring in big artists and people like that, and Patrick bringing his network of organizations, as well as us gathering a bunch of other people around us to support the whole process, we ended up launching this massive sequence of events for December 21st, 2012. So we had events in Stonehenge, Chichen Itza, Jerusalem. I was with a group of 200 to 250 people in Egypt at the pyramids and doing essentially meditation and ceremonies and in the king's chamber and between the paws of the Sphinx, all the way to a full Nile cruise after that, where we went through all of these different temples. And we all synchronized together around the world. And we had, film packs with us and different things so that all these different major events from cities around the world like New York and London and Tokyo and Sydney, et cetera, along with all of these sacred sites, we were capturing this moment of unity, this moment of movement and peacemaking. And it was quite profound. And it essentially rippled immediately. And we continued to grow our, social media reach really, really quickly until the days when essentially in 2013, as we got into Idle No More and we're working on supporting the indigenous movements and certain protections of tribes whose lands were trying to be stolen away by oil and gas companies, suddenly overnight, Facebook cut our reach. We were growing thousands and thousands of new followers a day organically, and Facebook literally just cut it off. They stopped it like a lever. And it took us multiple weeks to get in touch with them. And they just said, oh, sorry, sir, we have a new business system. And we're just making sure that if you just pay $50 to $100 a day, we'll ensure you keep getting your reach. And that was the moment we realized that Facebook had become a centralized mafia that had total control over people's reach and data. That was a big juncture for me in realizing that inevitably we're going to need to replace these massive centralized social media organizations. But at the time, I was really working on how do we monetize and essentially create traction for these communities of people that want to make change, to learning more and growing more together. And I had, through my speaking at the United Nations, I'd met at the White House, actually, initially, I met her that year. And then at the Nexus summits at the UN, I had a philanthropist woman who was interested in new energy technologies, which was one of my major curiosities at the time and interests. And I ended up introducing her to Nassim Haramein. And I ended up getting my friend Nassim, who's a physicist and working on quantum gravity theories and new energy systems. I ended up getting him about $13 million, 12 and some change. And essentially, he ended up setting up labs on Kauai. I ended up proposing that we build an online academy to teach people the physics because it was one of my passions as well. And I ended up joining and building my company, Superluminal Systems, with the director of the board of the Resonance Science Foundation, as well as that's Marshall Efforts, and Teresa Collins, and my bro, Harlan Wood. And we created a company to begin building online academies, starting with a school for unified physics that bridges science and spirituality. So I could really sort of fulfill that dharmic obligation that I'd felt inside of me since high school.
I'm curious on actually two aspects, because I know
Okay.
there's building these learning cohorts and building the deeper trust within, let's call them the tribes in plural, where some people
Sure.
may be super tech savvy, some people fall more into the broad bucket of like personal development and trauma healing. And that's one side of the coin. The other thing that really interests me is like, where is all these new tech standing? Because I know there's even a beautiful book that I always forget the title about, which is something like We've Lost 100 Years. I mean, at
Yeah.
least, right?
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
besides sketchy Facebook ads or YouTube ads, What's your personal take on
Mhm.
deploying machinery that out of the void, so to say, of the,
Mhm. Mhm.
literally the void, but meaning more like, in the superficial sense of
Yeah.
the Newtonian universe, can really
Mhm.
create energy. Do you have them at home? Did all of
Mhm.
your friends get killed? Because there's so many stories
Sure.
about that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question because it's something so many people are interested in. I actually do university talks on this, and I have for a very long time, covering specifically three different areas of technology. One of those would be considered to be localized quantum plenum or quantum vacuum based energy system. And that is, how do we pull from the quantum field that we know is full of energy and put that energy to work? Because we know it's there. Every theory backs it, every experimental observation backs that it's there. Um, and there's a lot of different projects working on that I've tracked over the years. I became good friends with Foster Gamble a long time ago, and his work with Thrive 2 showcases a lot of different work being done in this area, as well as, of course, Nassim Haramein, who I mentioned already, put, many, many millions into the development of this specific torus-based, energy system that he's been working on. Um, has anybody popped out a device that I could take home? Not yet, not that I've seen. But I have tracked projects. Really, it was more in the early 2000s and late 90s when I kind of got interested in this area that I came across pretty disturbing stuff. There's a 0 point energy forum online, and I was reading it regularly. And then all of a sudden, one of the guys says, "Oh my God, my friend's project just disappeared. They're gone. They're not in their garage anymore. All the stuff is gone. Like, I don't even know what happened to my friend." And stories like that of people disappearing, very strangely, I started to find there was a threat of that too. And obviously, there's this massive threat to the oil and gas industry and to certain economic industries because of this kind of energy. But it's also inevitable. At some point, it's going to happen. It's going to pop. And the way I look at it is, probably the only way it's going to really get out is if someone develops it, open sources the physics and tech, and releases it out to universities all over the world. Boom, you've done it. You've cut through. So if you're out there and you're listening to this and you've developed one of these systems, that's how you're going to get it out. You have to let it go. You have to let it become part of the world. And that's a kind of open source and spiritual foundation kind of move, because it requires you surrendering the ego to an extent to be able to do that. So that's one of the major technologies that I think is very close to being complete, based on as many projects as I've heard claims of success around. And there's also very practical technologies very similar, like, for example, a plasma engine that consumes matter, different kinds of trash, whatever you put in it, and it breaks the matter back down to very, very fundamental constituents and is able to produce energy. And that's trash to power. And there's lots of countries that can implement that kind of thing right now. Now, another one of the major energetic sort of systems that I see as being globally transformational is replication. Now, we've gotten real good at 3D printing, but most people aren't aware that due to things like laser LIGA, LIGA is a particular technology that you can use to build gemstones one molecule at a time. Now, the actual full word is in German. You'd probably be able to say it a lot better than me, but it's a whole massive thread. But essentially, we're getting down to being able to build objects at the smallest scale. Now, the real smallest scale would be down at the Planck scale. And I believe that if we're able to control a gravitational field to high levels of detail and density, using laser holography combined with cymatics, i.e., sound as vibration, we can actually start to literally replicate things the way you see in Star Trek, where you push a button and boom, there it is. Now, interestingly, what this does is it changes the entire economic resource game, because once you have this technology, anyone can make gold. Like, you just pop out gold. So what value does gold have? Doesn't matter anymore. All of the little minerals that we go and dig out of gigantic mountains to get these tiny little fractions of things, no problem anymore, right? And so what becomes important in the economic system is actually information, consciousness. What is it that we're going to do with the material, the art, so to speak, rather than the object? And I think that's a really, really beautiful stage of shift that will drastically change our economics. And then the third biggest technology is actually gravity control. And I think that there's deep connection between all three of these technologies. But gravity control enables you to create a field around your craft, your ship, your car, for example. And when done properly, you could create an envelope around the craft such that the craft does not experience time dilation or the resistance that we experience when we accelerate, i.e., g-force. You're gravitationally isolating the object, and what this can enable is instantaneous travel across the galaxy. Now, that gets really interesting when you start looking at that as a societal and cultural leap, because now you're talking about you can wake up, go spend the afternoon on another planet, go catch a sunset on this planet, then go catch a sunrise on that planet, and then make your way back home and hang out, on a beach somewhere, in the middle of the night, checking out bioluminescence before you head back to your house. And that's what a day could look like. And not to mention transport of goods, not to mention all the roads becoming obsolete. I mean, there's huge planetary transitions that happen with that kind of technology. So that's a little, groundwork of what the future of technology can look like outside of things that we're already, spiraling around, which is like AI, for example.
I love it. Sounds like we should physically meet again. So what I find very interesting is that, let's say, from a visionary standpoint,
Okay.
so usually the closest to what I materially can sense is actually not that far into the future. I give it like
Mm,
10 to 20 generations, 500 years into the future. I think all
mm,
of that will be just super commonplace. Just my gut feeling.
totally.
That's kind of the visions that I receive. Mm,
Sure.
Back back to 2024 and a little bit. Okay, so unify,
Yeah.
building an
Mm-hmm.
engine, synchronizing consciousness with hundreds of millions of people
Mm-hmm.
across the planet. How
Mm-hmm.
have you tried to engineer around this like monopolistic debt trap of like centralized social media? Any pathways that you can sketch? Any experiments that you have taken? Also,
Mm-hmm.
mistakes that you have for sure underwent, just that
Yeah.
others can learn from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for Unify in particular, our road to actually having the kind of reach that we have now was one that required looking at how we could collaborate with others much more effectively. The only way around the giant centralized throttling lever was essentially to build partnerships with many, many different organizations. We now have an Airtable that's got 30,000 organizations in it. And we know all the contacts, we know all, of all the people that are in those organizations. Um, but also at a social level, building partnerships with other pages such that we could do posts and they would co-post that content to their page, and we would do vice versa. So the pages share production of great content. We only do it with highly ethically aligned, consciously aligned pages. But we built a network of over 100 pages that co-post with each other. And that was one of the big ways around the Facebook issues. But all of these organizations that we've talked to, and certainly that I've polled, are frustrated with the way that the social network structures are and have been. And I've known this, and so have been building IP and systems towards how, what is it that could replace these things? What is a strategy that could actually help us move beyond the trap of these giant centralized social systems? And I also was friends with Art Brock and Eric for a very long time, who are the founders of an organization called Holochain. And back when we met, 17 years ago, Art was working on Source Tree Commons, and they came out with this idea of this thing called Scepter. And Scepter was like a very esoteric kind of explanation of what the future of the internet could be. And few of us even understood it at that time. But out of Scepter emerged this thing called Holochain. And Holochain essentially represents a complete change from the kind of blockchains that we are using right now, which in very many ways are still centralized, in the sense that you have a single centralized global ledger that everyone's trying to save their data to. So in the case of, Ethereum, you've got millions of projects vying to pay enough gas to get their transactions saved to that chain all at the same time. And it's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of a big energy waste. When you look at how much energy Bitcoin uses in computing around the world, it's actually more than all of the global banks and all of their buildings in all the cities of the entire world combined, which is ludicrous, right? And that says that if I'm going to give you $100, I need to have our transactions spread to every single ledger and every computer around the world, meaning I have to let everybody in the world know that we've just done that, just for that to be okay, because it's that level of gating, so to speak. But Holochain reverses this entire idea and says, well, that's not real. Like, what's real is you have an identity and someone else has an identity. And as long as those are verifiable, you should give them a token that's $100 bill. And that $100 bill is absolutely, you can check it. You can make sure it was minted. It's a real $100 bill. And if you take it to a bank, they're going to verify it the same way. And that's the only people that need to be involved in the transaction. And it turns out that that works. It works not only for finances, but it also works across the board for different kinds of other currencies. So suddenly, now we have this foundation that can enable you to store entire media files on your chain, right? And that every person is in fact their own blockchain. Every person has DNA, is what they call it. And that means that every transaction that they have is part of their ongoing ledger, irrefutable ledger. And every transaction is two ways. So both people store that data. So you've got sources of truth formed through the network that exists. And you're able to, as you access a big piece of media, like a movie file or whatever, in traditional computing, the more people try to watch that movie, when there's a big release on Netflix or Disney, they have to spin up massive server resources to make sure that their whole thing doesn't crash from all the people watching the movie. And it still does sometimes, right? To our very great annoyance. But then with Holochain, the more people access a media file or a website in the network, the faster it runs. It's like BitTorrent. The more seeds, the more people are looking at it, the faster it will run for everyone. And that inversion is exactly what we need for the future of the internet. And that is also why Holochain is a major partner and one of the foundations technologically of the system that I'm building called CoreNexus.
Yes, for me it feels like really just unpacking, your next big superhero project. But I know you're lucky and not the only superhero trying to help you to get that off the ground. So it's also shared in the show notes, but why CoreNexus? Why now? And
Yeah.
why do you think you can really materialize that? And what do you need for
Thank
that?
you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, obviously I'm passionate about it and love to get into it. And I'll tell a little bit about why CoreNexus as a bit of a story, because I initially thought what we need to do is like augment consciousness. And I initially thought, new interface, change how people look at things, create a new way for people to see and experience things, that's going to be enough. And I started to build and prototype on that front, as well as an open source project called Trust Graph that you guys can go and look at trustgraph.is, which is essentially like we need a new reputation engine. We need to be able to decentralize how we give and receive trust to find what's valuable, right? And then I built things called NodeSphere with my partner Harlan, where we start looking at how we can create civilization balls out of data. How do you create sustainable, sovereign data balls for people to hold and take forward in their lives? But all of these were really just kind of steps on the road. New interface, new reputation engine, new forms of trust, new forms of data aggregation, and sort of holographic data structuring, signed claims of different kinds. But out of all of these IP and prototypes that we built over the years, as well as our online academies and building online schools and gamification for those schools, I started to see a much more comprehensive picture. And I realized that, the heart of what CoreNexus can do is solve three huge problems. One of those is the fact that people are throttled on social media and they're looking for a solution. Over 45% of Americans have already said they would leave Facebook if there was a great alternative, right? But there hasn't been. And then in terms of e-commerce, everybody I know sells something online. Everybody, right? But most of them have to have their own WordPress site, keep up with their plugins, license those plugins. They've got to pay Constant Contact or MailChimp to have the mailing list. They got to pay Vimeo to host their videos. And the more you run a site like that, the more laborious it gets, because you can update a plugin and the whole site crashes. The e-commerce system gets more and more extensions, and then it starts getting really buggy, right? And I started looking at, all right, well, what would it look like if we could take those transactions straight inside our social network? That's where we're doing the sales anyway, right? I mean, we're all trying to drive people to our products through our social media pages. So duh, why wouldn't you sell it right there? And then the big third thing was that I saw that everybody wants to make the world a better place, but nobody trusts the charities. Nobody trusts the Red Cross. Nobody trusts these gargantuan things. One in five Americans is the essential recipe. And I'm using the Americans because unfortunately it's just some of the data that's available. There's a book called Fail of Charities in the 21st Century. And essentially it's because they're lacking validation. They're lacking the ability to prove to us that they're actually doing anything. And I started to see this combination where, what if you have new kind of social media experience, new kind of interface? Let's go further. Like, forget the flat boxes and whatever. Let's go Iron Man tech, because we all want Iron Man tech anyway, right? We all want like floating dashboards and everything to be accessible, and we can talk to our system and it talks back, and the Jarvis kind of thing. And go there, and you can sell things directly from your social media. So any kind of digital product you make, episodic media content, courses, art, coaching packages, services, whatever it is, you can sell it from there. And every time you sell something, you can automatically split royalties. This is one of our big innovations called Holofractal. You can automatically split royalties to any of your friends that you collaborated with, or to any other projects that you incorporated in your project. So if you pull in images or videos to your course, you can automatically pay royalties to them, kind of like a licensing fee, just by attaching it into your system. But we also make a transaction fee off of that. Superluminal, that's our business and our income. We make a little cut off of all of those sales. That makes us crazy amounts of money as you get into scale, right? And you can also have every person donate 1% up to 100% of their take to whatever area of impact they care about. And therein was the game changer, because I realized we could gamify it such that people want to buy the products that give more to impact, because they're going to earn more impact points as a buyer. So the seller's incentivized to give more to impact. Now, do we just keep this money donated to impact and some funds and then just shotgun it off to charities? No. And there I figured out the kind of really linchpin piece, because I've been doing these real world missions, real world quests inside my online schools. And I thought, what would it look like if anyone could create a mission or create a quest, and there gets a bounty attached to it, so that they can invite 10 friends, go and clean up a river, take some selfies, have a moment, the river was trashy, now it's not trashy, here's our bags of trash, cool, aren't we awesome, social media moment, upload that to the mission, and boom, $100 hits all their wallets, they all earn badges, they all earn points, and suddenly we've revolutionized the gig economy. Suddenly, instead of just TaskRabbit, Uber, and Lyft going to clean up someone's toilet or drive them to grandma's house, you can actually participate in real world impact projects all over the world and get paid for them. And that is huge. And it also creates the groundwork for validation that's necessary to take us to the next stage, because there's $1 trillion plus in impact money every year that doesn't go anywhere. It's just sitting there because they can't actually validate that something real has happened and that real change has been made. And when we socialize that, when we open that into a social network, it has the power to change everything. And of course, the digital products market of people buying and selling with each other, that's already, over $1 trillion a year. So if you take a small percentage of that and start seeing that getting donated to impact and funding jobs, which is impact vocation, and not only funding jobs, but it can fund people's exits out of homeless recovery, for example, and help people actually get back on their feet, which is my partner, David Hofstadter, and Get Help, and Tony Greco, who's in 19 states trying to help the homeless problem. And the real question is, how do you get from recovery to vocation? How do you get back into the workforce? And I think that channeling that energy towards impact and towards doing good in the world is really the thing that people want and that they need now. You look at all the kids coming out of high school, they don't want to do a 9-to-5 job. They don't want to come out of college and go straight into a giant, office building. That is not their goal. They're looking at, how do they become an entrepreneur? How do they build their own credibility? How do they build their own recognition in the world and become leaders? And right now, the only way to do that is just to look cool on TikTok, right? But we say, well, what if it was more than that? You could look cool, but you can look cool and create digital products, make money that way, join missions, earn badges and ranking, become a recognized leader. And now when you go as an entrepreneur to go raise your money and build your company, you have so much traction. You've proven traction, not I just have a big following, which means nothing, right? Or I have these degrees, which mean nothing, as we know. So that's a little bit of CoreNexus, just to give you kind of the high level, big picture of some of the major problems and solutions that we're deploying.
Let's go from big picture to it's a model I frequently utilize in the podcast. Super simple, like Horizon 1, 2, 3 model. So where you're standing now, where could you be in a year or two? What would be a 5-year vision and a 10-year one?
I love that. That's such a beautiful framework. Yeah. So, we have now about 11, 12 years of IP behind us. We finally, after lots of our own investment and reinvestment of academy funds and business funds and client funds, we finally raised around 880K in the last couple of years, and we're able to finally build the first fully working dashboard prototype. We got to our alpha pilot in the fall, had a small niche community come in so that we could test some of the community features, and they loaded a whole series of courses onto the platform, which are little educational modules. Very simple, but it got us, building the custom theme for a community and sort of playing with some of the different facets of Core Network's customization, as well as its like baseline user experience. And as we round into this year, we're preparing to open a formal seed round. Our goal is to raise a total of 3.6 million. I have 1 million of that committed that I'm working to try to close in the next couple of weeks. Crossing my fingers on that and staying really focused on it. The commitment's very strong. It's just a time where a lot of people are pretty overwhelmed, so the team's moving a bit slow. But my hope is to close that, ramp into this formal priced round and complete that. And then this year, the goal is to release the course sequencing and mission system. And we have some really powerful additions coming into that now because of AI. One of them is an interviewer that can live interview you as you're creating your content and support you in the process of crafting a really powerful course or really powerful piece of sequenced content. So that's all about getting us to revenue with CoreNexus, getting it into the stage where I can import all the Guardian Alliance courses, start bringing in other academies, start bringing in some of the around 20 different LOIs I have from different organizations, and get those orgs on the platform, essentially selling their stuff and creating media, bringing and importing their media from the main systems into CoreNexus. We've already have working importers for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So a group doesn't have to leave their entire social media world behind. They can literally import all that data to CoreNexus and now have all of it in their own decentralized ID. They can control it, they can re-release it, they can monetize it, they can do whatever they want with it. And so those are the kind of really crucial features to get out this year. And then in 5 years, what I see us getting to is a stage where essentially we're, we've captured, say, 8% of Unify's audience. That's the monthly reach. So we have 100 million reach a month. That vacillates. If I can galvanize 8% of that audience into CoreNexus, we're essentially $1 billion company at that point. And I also, at that stage, estimate that somewhere up to around 10% of people's income that they're making on the platform will also be going to impact. And that means we're creating $500 million focused on impact every year, just from all of these people doing transactions and creating this opportunity. And every bit of that impact funding, means jobs. That actually means real jobs. And if you do the calculations off that, it's around 4 million paid days of work per year. So, and that's at $100 per day. If you had that as like, someone's really just going to do 1 or 2 little jobs, and so they go clean up a river for a few hours, they make $100, right? And that's a sustainable baseline for a lot of people in a lot of places. It may not work everywhere, but we can always tier income, based on different areas of the world. But yeah, in 5 years, I see us easily as $1 billion company channeling massive amounts of impact work in the world and essentially being a different kind of social media platform, not seen in the same league as the competitors of Twitter and Facebook and et cetera, but actually as a planetary operating system, as an engine for growth, development, education, and deployment of change.
Beautiful, because although we only met a short while ago, what you have been just sketching comes through the hearts and minds and souls and mouths of so many people around me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel very grateful, to be able to help with a couple of intros. Um,
Mm.
towards the end of the podcast, since not all of the listeners are like accredited investors, anybody that got like hooked up on CoreNexus or got interested in you, what are maybe one or two or three ways to enter into contact with you, helping to get CoreNexus off the ground? Maybe some of those listening have like amazing content that they want to
Mm.
basically put into the platforms. Yeah. So how can people
Right.
ideally reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way is just go to corenexus.is, CoreNexus.is, and jump on our mailing list, reach out to us through the contact form. We are, as I said, we are deep in LOIs with some initial organizations, but we always welcome other orgs signing on with us in that way, because that's our fleet. And we want to come to the world as a fleet together to make this change. And we do have opportunities available at the table to create sort of custom environments for your community. If you have a particular vision that you'd like to implement, we do offer that as part of our contract work. And that's one of our other ways of sort of bootstrapping capital as we move towards, transaction fees as the main revenue model. And we can also facilitate at a certain stage this year, handling your membership transactions too. So you can have your member subscriptions or your membership fees that you charge to people to be part of your network, move through CoreNexus, and we can easily split and operate that capital for you in a really, really elegant way. So CoreNexus.is is a great way to get in touch with us and to get on our list. We will be opening up sort of in stages to an alpha group over this year, and then finally into a larger public beta. And yeah, and in terms of getting to know me, you can just Google my name. There's a lot of ways that you can find out about me and my work. It's pretty out there, and I'm in all kinds of spaces and in all kinds of ways. But I also very much welcome anyone who'd like to meet me and connect with me directly. I'm very accessible in that way and very committed to essentially building community, building clarity, building alliances for change on this planet. And you don't have to be into all the esoteric stuff. You can actually just be into making the world a better place, and you'll have my support and my presence fully committed.
So, closing the podcast for today, I have the feeling, since this was like rich and deep and wicked and entertaining, but also, some real stuff where, some listeners may, if they're still here, right? Get
Right.
really excited. Is if you were, imagine I were to ask you to summarize like what are the core nuggets that the listeners should take home?
Mm.
Why do you think, and I pretty much agree, that like gamifying planetary transformation and you being a kind of a player in that and having fun and earning income and getting independent is so
Mm.
crucial on this threshold towards a planetary civilization?
Yeah, I mean, what a great question, because it really does come back to we can't make people change by some ideal that they're just going to stop, buying certain things, or they're just going to stop driving their car, or they're just going to like stop doing things that are part of their relaxed enjoyment of life. I think that there's this sort of delusion that a lot of us have that people will automatically just kind of cut out everything bad out of their lives and simplify their lives, and boom, we're going to make the world a better place. And all it takes is everybody relinquishing all that stuff. Yeah, I don't think that's actually going to work. Just knowing people, talking to people, being an explorer of psychology, and what I have found is that if you can align something with something that people already do. Like if they already buy Ziploc bags and now they can buy compostable Ziploc bags that are just as good, okay, cool. I'll buy the compostable ones because they're just as good. Um, but gamification works a lot like that. You know, we are a risk and reward species in many ways. We like to try things. We like to feel rewarded. We like to feel like we've accomplished something, you know, and there's a reason why the lotteries are so huge. There's a reason why gambling is so huge. And so thinking along the lines that people already think along around their own ego, like being big in the world. What does that mean? What makes people think you're big? What makes people think you're cool? Well, right now, one of your only metrics for that is followers on social media. But everybody that has lots of followers can tell you it's not all it's cracked up to be. It doesn't really give them anything powerful because that gigantic reach can be throttled just as easily as a small reach can. And you can have 100,000 or 1,000,000 followers and reach 10 people with a post, right? So, yeah, what would it look like if you weren't throttled? What would it look like if the metrics of your work in the world were more than how many people follow you? But what if every time you sold a piece of music, you could show how many rivers got cleaned up or trees got planted or elephant sanctuaries got protected? What if you could communicate through your social work in the world and just your creativity in the world, what you care about in the world and what you think is important in the world? And what if, you know, social media wasn't just about, oh, cool, I have a bunch of friends on a list online, and was also about, hey, I'm here. What's going on? Well, you know, today we're doing this big arts project in the city and it's funded by CoreNexus. You want to come down? Sure. You go down and you join a mission with a bunch of people that are like-minded, and you're actually hanging out together, doing a project in real life together. Wow, what a concept, right? And then guess what? You all get paid for it. You all get acknowledgement for it. We create impact stories out of what you've done, and now we're spreading those through the media and getting news for you. So how can we really acknowledge the fact that we're egoic beings and we like people to think that we're great, and also turn that towards love, turn that towards acceptance of self and acceptance of others, and how we can be in greater service to good in the world? Because it's fine if you love yourself, just love yourself and love others too, and be in service to others and be in service to life. That's where it gets really powerful. And if you look at the millennials and the gaming world, I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, millennials are massive, massive, massive gaming industry, and they're not looking for another flat, same old boxy Windows 95 social network. They're looking for what's at the next level, what's going to take them to the next level. And millennials travel more than any other age group, and they're often looking for, how do I create income while I'm traveling? And we can gamify that process to where they're earning badges and ranks and stuff in places all over the world. And now they've got like the full Jedi badge of like the whole world's, you know, they've been making change and building their network and building real world connections in all those places at the same time. So there's a few visions of why I'm so passionate about this and why I see it can be such a game changer for the next generations, as well as for all of us that have sought to make the world a better place.
Beautiful. Very little to add. I know when it came out, I really went to see Ready Player One in one of these
Mm-hmm.
super crazy IMAX type 3D whatever theaters.
Yeah, yeah.
So, alas, may it happen, may it materialize. I know that maybe that's a good finishing line. I know really I joined Facebook pretty early, mainly because I had such a distributed network of friends across so many continents. I was a big fan of it. And
Mm-hmm.
I only joined Instagram, I think, like 2 years ago. or so. And I
Mhm.
barely use social media, but
Right.
as a programmed way to inform myself from left to
Mm.
right, from all the different rabbit holes, all these
Wow.
tiny news media outlets. I would say that's my main use of social media these days. So
Right. Right.
if I knew there were a niche community like the Jedis, I would rather use the terminology of the Bodhisattva.
Sure.
But Jedi, fine, get my Jedi badge and interact with other people whilst I'm anyhow just doing the projects that I'm passionate about, and can
Yeah.
amplify that through a new typology of a social network. So,
Yeah.
Adam, thanks so much. Any finishing
Mhm.
comment besides me saying, alas?
Yeah, well, I'll riff on one little thing that you said, which is, Ready Player One, the Oasis. Wow, wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, but remember that the story of Ready Player One is a cautionary one. Nobody wants to live in the world that everybody wants to escape to a virtual world from, right? Like, that's not the world we really want. And we're in a way on a dystopian trail towards that, where it's like, you're not going to care about the world around you. You're just going to care about your virtual world. And I think what CoreNexus does is really flip that on its head and say, actually, the whole point of this technology is how do we use it to serve the real world? How do we use it to make our lives a better and to make the world a better place and to stop our ecological destruction and start managing and stewarding our planet better? So I believe that the future of the metaverse is really the empowerment of the mind and the perception to actually begin taking true ownership and stewardship over the world around us and to make it better for everyone.
Thanks so much for the conversation, Adam. It was
Such a
such
pleasure,
a
Alistair.
pleasure. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. All right. Aloha.